So a student who has a job and doesn't have a lot of activities other than that, they're working 25 hours a week and they're doing school full time in a rigorous curriculum. It tells us that this student is responsible to another person or another people. They have to be on a schedule. Our view of a student having work as an activity tells us a lot about how they are functioning in their life as a 17-year-old and the degree of time management and responsibility and interaction with others that requires. That's really valuable information.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Office Hours, where we break down the latest trends in higher education and what those trends mean for students and families. Today, I sat down with Whitney Soule, who's the Vice Provost and Dean of Admission at the University of Pennsylvania. Our conversation focused on managing stress in the admissions process for both students and families. This is a really interesting conversation. I'm excited to share it with you. Let's jump right in. Hey everyone, my name is Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarship 360, and I'm really excited to be joined today by the Vice Provost and Dean of Admission at the University of Pennsylvania, Whitney Soule. Welcome, Whitney.
Thanks for having me.
So, Whitney, I know you've talked a lot and written a lot about bringing the temperature down in the admissions process, and that's something I'm really excited to talk to you about. Uh, when we kick these conversations off with other guests, I'll usually ask about like myths or misconceptions in the admissions process, and want to offer you a little bit of a twist on that question. I'm curious what myths you think kind of fuel the most anxiety for students and for families.
I think the myth of hyperachievement as the way to secure a spot is not only a myth, but I think it's actually really damaging to students. And I'll give an example of what I mean by that. So at University of Pennsylvania, we're a highly selective institution by the math. 70,000 plus applications for 2,400 places in our undergraduate first year class. So the math is tough, right? Just looking at that. And as our applications have grown, it the admit rate just gets smaller and smaller. Again, function of numerator and denominator. And I think what happens is for families and kids trying to figure out what will it take to get in, they imagine that what we're doing is raising the bar higher and higher and higher so that only the number that we need can get over it. And as it becomes more and more difficult, just on admit rate, students are raising that bar for themselves higher and higher and higher. And it's damaging because that's not how we view our applicant pool. And our job in admission, and my job as a dean, is to make sure that we are admitting students into our school that have both the content they need and the skill to draw on that content when they arrive as a first year student to be successful at Penn, academically speaking, and also that they have enough self-awareness and ability to draw on their own skills to participate in a community, broadly speaking. Most of our applicant pool has those things, and so it's not trying to just make the bar higher and higher. It's just looking into the big applicant pool and from it selecting students whose combination of interests and both academic and personal and how they describe how they want to participate in Penn's academic life and community, how is that aligning with what it is that we have to offer and the spaces that we're filling? And particularly at Penn and schools like ours, where we have multiple undergraduate schools. So in that class of 2,400 students, we have a College of Arts and Science, which is your traditional liberal arts experience, and the professional schools of Wharton Business and nursing and engineering. And so we're thinking about those particularly as well. And that adds another layer of review and contextualization. So what I would hope students can get comfortable with is looking at what they do, what they've studied, what they want to do, and really focusing on how do I want to describe myself and those things and present my academic preparation relative to what I know Penn needs and requires, rather than I have to be perfect, more than perfect, because that's what it's going to take to get a spot.
Yeah, and I'm sure just like at the end of the process, and like when I was on the high school side working with, a lot of students looking at highly selective institutions, I think sometimes the sad takeaway is they feel like they were not enough when it's not the process is not a reflection on you or what you've accomplished or who you are as a human being. So I think that's a just such a great reframing for students and for families.
And I think, think about the American Idol line that goes, 3 blocks long or more of people standing in line, hoping to get a chance to audition to get on to that show. And there's a lot of talent in that line, and they're only going to take a certain number of people, and they're thinking as a judge group of like, what's the combination that we want to sort of bring forward into this season? And certainly, education's an entirely different undertaking than a competitive show like that. But still, when you think about the abundance of talent and having to review that talent and work your way to sort of the discipline of limits, right? There can only be so many. Then then I think that might be another way for students to think about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think yeah, that is a really great analogy. I know one thing that we've been hearing a lot from students and families, it's just been an interesting few years for testing in the admissions process as more institutions are, requiring test scores. That testing seems to be coming back. I think it does cause a little bit of confusion for students and for families. I think especially when it comes to highly selective institutions, highly selective scholarship programs where, it's just not possible to be less than perfect and still like have a shot. I'm kind of curious what your take is on this as a dean.
Yeah. I mean, it it is one of the most confusing conversations out there right now around testing and so and I'm not going to be able to offer the answer on what to do about your testing, but I can describe sort of the evolution of the role of testing, particularly since COVID. So, and with that, maybe then families can sort of work in their own space of what makes sense here as a student is thinking about applying to a particular school. But prior to 2020, there were a lot of schools that had gone test optional, and it was pretty straightforward. We're not asking for your testing. Our process works without it. If you want to include it, we'll look at it. But if it's not here, we're not going to spend our time wondering or imagining what the testing is. Because why would we take the time to imagine it if we could just ask you to send it? Like if we really needed to fill in this piece of information, we would require it. And so that was pretty straightforward in the role of test optionality prior to COVID. In COVID, when most schools took on some version of test optionality and then since have worked their way back to requiring it or modifying what their option means and the guidance around it, it is really confusing for families. And I'll start by saying that as it relates to admission processes that are described as holistic or comprehensive, meaning we're not using algorithms to decide who we're even going to start to look at, and we're using all of the pieces of the application to try to understand the student. When you're in a holistic admission review like that, testing holds a place. And the conversation about testing right now holds way too much space in the narrative around college admissions, much more space than it probably holds in any admission office, actually, testing. And so I think it's really important to get the signal from the schools to which a student's planning to apply of how that school is describing the role of testing. And it's not going to be the same everywhere. Test optionality is not the same over and over and over again anymore. So in some cases, a school will describe it as we don't require you to submit testing, but if you have it, we would like to see it, right? So it's not a requirement, but we're encouraging you to send it. That's signaling to you this school values testing and and you should probably be putting it forward unless you really think it's going to be problematic somehow. If a school says nothing, like test optionality just exists and there isn't an explanation for it, I think it's okay to lean toward their they have de-emphasized the role of testing, including in how to apply to that school, right? Like really minimizing the role of testing in everything that they're presenting. And you'll see some schools then say we're test optional, and if you submit testing or if you don't, that's how it plays out for us. I think that biggest anxiety is that uh, students think that if they don't submit their testing, the admission office is going to assume it's really, really bad. So they should send it in anyway so that it's not as bad as you might think it is if you can't see it. And back to the point of I don't think admissions offices spend a lot of time imagining a result that they could just ask you for. But I do think it's worth looking at both the profile that a school will provide on their testing profile of their incoming class to give you some understanding of what have they responded to for testing wise, and also contextualizing the student's score result within their high school. How does the testing in their current peer environment academically, how does that compare, right? And so they could be at odds. The testing in the school environment could be really strong and be below the middle 50% of what a school is providing. I would lean toward really strong in school environment and see that as a positive contribution. Penn has gone back to requiring testing this year, and uh, we understand that there are a lot of students who don't have access to testing. And when we were test optional, that was good for them because they still had a pathway into our application process. And we have included a waiver, an automatic waiver. If you do not have testing as a result of not being able to access testing for finances or natural disasters, which happens for a lot of students, or you're living in a place where you just can't get to a testing site, you can still apply here and you let us know, you know, what what your reason or hardship is for not having testing, and we know how to work our process without it.
Yeah, no, I think that it can be a little bit of an unsatisfying, but true just advice for students that they want like a very one clear overarching, yes, no answer. Whereas I love this framework that you provide, and I think really important for students to remember their high school environment, and just looking at themselves in that context, which is really, really important. But totally agree. I think when I was on the school counseling side, it was a hard thing to advise students on just because there are so many, different variables when thinking about this. So I think students out there and families have a great, great framework for making that decision making process. And just remembering that this is all very school specific. It's not like you have to, just as, a specific student choose to be test optional or not everywhere. This can be, specific to each institution that you're applying to.
Right.
Um, To shift gears a little bit, I know, on my, again, work with students and families. I think there's this view that, college is just this sort of end all experience. And I think that's not exactly the case. I think it's a wonderful launching pad, and I think it can be such a mistake just to think about the admissions process as just the entire story. I'm really curious how you think parents can help reframe this for their student, that this is just one chapter, an important chapter, but it is one chapter in a bigger story for you.
I love this question because not only is it one chapter, it's a chapter that could play out in amazing ways for students in lots of different schools. So, when you hear a student talk, I'm going to use Penn, but when you hear a student say, like, my time at Penn was life-changing, and they describe what what they did and who they got to know and the network that supports them once they graduated and all of those amazing things, those are real. That also can happen in a lot of different schools. And so the power of a college education is in sort of the breadth of that whole experience and being in a place where you as a student feel inspired to like harness your motivation and take advantage of what is there academically and personally. And there's a lot of different ways that schools deploy their opportunities. And so part of the work for the student is making sure that that list to which they're applying aligns with what they know is a motivating environment for them. And it won't look the same at every school, but there will be a number of schools that can provide enough of those components for a student to have a really good experience. And so I think I think the point about, all or nothing in college and it has to be this one or it's not worth it is it it's also really damaging thinking because it overvalues the container of education instead of overvaluing the experience of education that will carry on for a really long time. And I can say this confidently as a dean where like I want students if they're admitted to come to my school, right? Like I don't want to downplay how amazing I think Penn is. And when we admit students, we want them to choose us. But as a practical matter and going into this process, it is the student has to live this out for 4 years. And so it's not a reflection of the value of them as a person or their character or their parents' parenting, where they go to school. What's really going to matter is what's happening for that student in said school. And there are there's always multiple schools that could satisfy that for a student and working to build the list for that so that the chances of wherever you're admitted will satisfy those conditions for motivation and participation and value and experiencing your education is the biggest part.
Yeah, no, I think that's I 100% agree. When I think it's interesting sometimes talking to transfer students, and I don't know if you've had this experience where they, might tell you, "Oh, I was just like so set on this, one school," and maybe they even applied early decision, and they realized that this was, not necessarily the place for them. And I know that can happen to anyone, but I think it's just like always just a good reminder to me that you should be thinking about these like broader aspects of yourself, like where you would like to learn, where do you like to be, what type of people you'd like to be around, versus just sort of honing in on like this one school being the goal and it's kind of a pass fail situation. Uh,
Yeah, for sure.
I I'm curious, Whitney, you've been obviously an admissions professional, um, you know, at a number of schools, have read countless number of applications, spoken with countless numbers of students and parents. Do you think that stress and anxiety in this process has been increasing?
Oh my gosh, it has been escalating in my whole career, which spans more than 30 years, but it is escalating at a rate now that is just really even hard to wrap your head around. And I think there's a lot of contributing factors. I think that there is a ton of access to information that's considered guidance. The how I got in kind of narrative that is authored and supported by people who have nothing to do with admissions at all, often students who are making assumptions about how they got in. And because they got into a place, people see that as an authority, when in fact, that student has no idea how they got selected. um, or, you know, because it's so hard to understand the results when really strong students are not admitted to a place for which they're like a wonderful match, seeking some sort of data point that's going to help make sense of what does it take. And this kind of goes back to where we were earlier in the conversation. And it's, and so because you can't sit in a committee room and see the review of 72 plus thousand applications play out, there isn't really a good data point that will explain how decisions got made over the course of a season. So people will look for test score, GPA, rank, activity, honors, like, and they'll know somebody who has these things, and that becomes the standard for what Penn must want. It's also been the idea of guiding students toward, what will it take has been monetized in ways that I think are really damaging. I'll give an example where uh, in the I don't know, maybe 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I don't remember which one, we stopped at Penn publishing our admit rate from admissions. And in our news release, we don't put the admit rate, we don't go through all the demographic categories. And instead, what I was saying is, we had amazing applicants. And of the students that we've just admitted that we've chosen, here's what they have in common. 80% of them do community service, 40% of them have jobs, a third of them have done research. And it took a hot minute for research to become an anchor for people and organizations to say, Penn requires research. If
Mm.
you work with us and pay them, we'll tell you what research you need and how to get it so that you can get into Penn. And when things like that start happening and people are looking for support or a way in, you start crowding the individual student and allowing them to be who they actually are and start applying all these bolt-on conditions that are probably not necessary or effective. And when that starts happening, the student themselves starts to disappear in the application. And truly, like the strongest position a student has in a comprehensive review like ours and many other schools is that they're already not like anybody else. They stand out because they're an individual. Like there's not one other application that's going to look like what they're providing as a package of themselves and their academic and personal experiences. And when the superficial narrative out there starts to rewrite for students and the pressure that others can place on them and also themselves, putting pressure to become this thing, then all of a sudden you start getting a whole lot that looks a lot of same and a lot of the same thing, and you start losing the individual power within it. And it's so counterproductive. But the anxiety around getting into a place that has to be the place, to your earlier point, I think is really um, putting a, an unfair sort of script around how a young person should be experiencing their life as a teenager, which is what we're expecting to read. Teenagers, like, and where teenagers would naturally be developmentally as they approach the end of high school and are able to articulate what they want to do next.
Yeah, no, I think that's really really interesting to get your perspective on this. Also made me think of like something as like simple as like a part-time job, which I think can be like kind of rare. Is like, the idea that that's like not impressive enough versus like, doing all the different types of things that you can do. Whereas I think like counterintuitively that actually can like stand out because that's like, just, very like relatable. It's not, does like teach you a lot of like interesting skills. And that doesn't mean like just go get a part-time job just because it will look good on a college application. But just this idea that you don't need to over engineer every aspect of your life just to fit into a specific box because that box does not exist.
It doesn't exist. And also, like, our process has to work for students from all kinds of backgrounds and levels of resource. And so we can't overvalue experiences that are dependent on financial resource, right? Or human resource support, because so many of our applicants don't have that to rely on. And so we we have to, as evaluators and the processes that we use, we have to be able to see the value of what a student is able to present to us, back to where we started the conversation on content and skill to draw from it, from whatever their life container is at that point. So a student who has a job, maybe a job all year round, and doesn't have a lot of activities other than that, they're working 25 hours a week and they're doing school full time in a rigorous curriculum, but a very limited time to apply to activities, particularly if their job schedule keeps changing in some way. It's really hard to prioritize things even that are school sponsored if they always are on the same calendar. Well, what does having a job tell us? It tells us that this student is responsible to another person or another people. They have to be on a schedule. They have to complete whatever the tasks are. Even, it doesn't have to be an internship job. It doesn't have to be a professional prep job. It can be scooping ice cream or bagging groceries or, you know, unloading boxes somewhere. I mean, whatever it is, our view of a student having work as an activity tells us a lot about how they are functioning in their life as a 17-year-old and the degree of time management and responsibility and interaction with others that requires. That's really valuable information. And um, and I do all that I can to try to emphasize that, so students who don't have a long list of activities for whatever reason, but are really committed to the ones that they're in by choice or by circumstance, that we have a way of understanding that and valuing it in the work that we're doing.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I'm curious as you think about advice for parents of younger students, advice to sort of prevent this admission stress from building over the years. And I think, you know, as parents, obviously you want your children to grow and thrive and be successful and all of that, but not to kind of stamp out their identity just for the sake of getting into a particular college. So
Yeah.
curious what advice you might have.
Well, and I'm a parent, and my children are through college at this point, but um, I mean, I think to put this in the broader context of the many ways that young kids and all the way through, I mean, for all of us, but when we're thinking about parenting kids, and particularly as they're on their way to a college process, is that the influences that exist now are overwhelming and are designed to lead people to look like something, to do something in a particular way, and the momentum in which what the thing is can shift can happen in 24 hours. This thing is in, this way of dressing is in, this food is in, and the access to all of that direction around what you should be doing is is a lot for anybody. And so you add to that the influences, the amount of times a person is subtly or not so subtly directed toward the way something should be, translated to here's how you should be, is is it's tough. And the college admission process and how to prepare yourself and situate yourself and try to get the spot that you're looking for is part of that. And so trying to extract a young person out of that pressure is really, it's a big charge, because it's not just extracting them out of the college prep pressure, it's helping build the skills to have some resiliency around the constant noise around do this, be this, without giving room for a young person to continue to develop into what they know and to spend time on things that they like. And, by the time a student is applying to college, they still don't know a lot about who they want to be. I really push back against the language around, tell us what you're passionate about, because how many young people actually know what they're passionate about? They know what they like to do, and it might be that they like skateboarding, and they're gonna like that. That doesn't mean that they want to be skateboarding as a career, right? And then they feel like they have to invent some passion, right? But if you look at skateboarding as like an activity that they would do all day long if they could do it, while they're also being a really good student and they're doing all these other things, it's like, what is it about that that's fun? Why do you enjoy doing it so much? Does it bring you around your friends? Are you always like pushing the level of how well you can do it? Is it, physically challenging? Like there are reasons why somebody likes the thing that they're doing. And helping young people attach to those reasons and appreciate them and then look for other places where that stuff can come up. That's the best way to help a student through like growing up in a world where they're told everywhere about what they should be doing, but particularly as they're trying to put together a college application, which is stressful just because it's limited in what it can say. And students feel like, there's so much at stake. And the truth is, students who want to go to college can go to college. There are thousands of colleges and universities in the United States where a student can get an amazing education and motivate them in the ways that we were describing earlier in this. And I think giving students the room to be the age that they are and helping them begin to notice what they like and to be able to change their minds is really, really important.
Yeah, no, I think it's just like kind of, the old fashioned advice of just, be like pursuing like what you're interested in. And I know that, I know I get that's hard and it feels like when you're a student, like I remember when I was applying to college, I one of the reasons I selected the school I did and my application was studying accounting just because I thought that was a good like career choice, and I really you know had like very little interest in that, and I loved history, so I just wound up like I never took a like business or accounting class in college and just took a lot of US history classes because I found it interesting. And I like to think I was able to learn and grow just because I was like very engaged with the content. And I think liberal arts can be a wonderful like don't I think there's a lot of folks who are down on the liberal arts, but I think it's if it's something that you're interested in, and you work at it, you're going to learn and grow and learn to write and communicate and research and think about change over time. So I think that can be very, very underrated versus like to your point, the thing which like can always be changing. And even when I think about something like accounting now, like just seems like that is like very ripe for like AI to like be very disruptive, versus I think like liberal arts and like humanities are timeless. Again, not that there's anything wrong with other studying other things, but
Yeah, and also the jobs that students are going to have don't even exist now, right? I mean, some of them don't exist. I mean, a lot of jobs that we're doing, I mean, my job has existed for a couple hundred
yeah.
years. But there are a lot of jobs that it's like that people are doing now in the world that didn't exist even 10 years ago. And so, the goal of the education, even with a professional focus, I mean, we do have three professional schools. Part of the responsibility in those schools is understanding that very point that our students are going to be graduating into a world that's going to keep changing. And so they need to be prepared for the world that they encounter in the work right when they graduate, but also that what they have learned throughout the education is thinking much bigger, right? Like the expanse of how you draw on what you know and where you can connect it is so much greater than whatever your particular focus was in school.
Yeah, and there's a lot of time. I think you're gonna have a lifetime to try new things, get new skilling. Personally, I did my master's, and it was an intersection of education, entrepreneurship, at Penn, which is great, and it was just like a really cool transition, from working in school counseling and admissions to starting a company and doing what I'm doing now, and I'm really grateful for that. But I took a little bit of time, and I think always like to just encourage patience for students, explore the things that you're interested in. And you will have other opportunities to learn and grow and try new things. You're going to have like so many different careers in your lifetime, especially students right now. Kind of taking a step back and a deep breath is, I think, a good thing.
Yeah, and I think even that, even in a career, I mean, I think about my career that has been in admissions for a really long time, but even I feel like I've had multiple careers in this career, right? Because the way we work has changed so much, and the stakeholders to whom we answer, like that list has gotten a whole lot bigger. And the expectations for what we do and what we can deliver in any particular class are really different and more complex than they were 30 years ago. So even staying in a profession can still require a whole lot of adaptation and stretching and entrepreneurial thinking, even if it's not in itself a new business, right? That it does require that kind of thinking to be strategic and good at the work you do.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about how even in, enrollment management or, as colleges are like thinking about like something like digital marketing, it's like that all impacts like how an institution has to think about their marketing efforts and thinking about data and thinking about, um, you know, strategies for, video and like these different like LLM products. And none of us are living in a vacuum. So that, yeah, totally, totally agree. Um, to bring this back to kind of thinking about parenting, because I know there are a lot of parents who listen to this. I know in an article last year you talked about kind of the three roles for parents in the admissions process. I really love this framework and was just wondering if you could walk us through it. And we'll also include a link to the article in the show notes, so folks can check it out.
Yeah, sure. I think um, there are a number of important roles in the admission process. Parents actually only get one. And so the way that I think about it is, there's if the student is in a school where there's college counseling support, then that's a particular role, and that's a person whose career is dedicated to understanding the college application landscape and helping advise a student through that with, a giant um, access to real-time content around what's happening in higher ed and with these particular institutions where a student might be interested, and how to best advise a student to prepare for any one of those things, including cost and financial aid. And that's that's their whole job. That doesn't exist in every school, but where it does, that's that person's area of expertise, and should be seen as an area of expertise and unique kind of support in the process. Then there's a dean like me and the shop that we run, and my responsibility is to, by the time school opens, to have a class of 2,400 students with 95 going to nursing, with 385 going to Wharton, 383 going to engineering, and 1,424 going to the College of Arts and Science. And not about that number, right? Like that's those are the numbers because we have a capacity for how big the class can be and how big each of the individual school classes can be. Altogether, that's going to be 2,400 students. So I'm responsible for some very specific containers. And then within that, we are thinking about what each of the four schools has as their priorities and their vision for how they want to deliver their education and programs that they have coming online that they want to bring students into. And so we're working with all of that. And and then we're also thinking about like sort of the fundamental values of creating a learning environment around the the unique perspectives that each individual student is going to bring into that space so that it is not it is as heterogeneous of thinking as we can possibly make it. uh, because the more points of view you have, the more ways of understanding a topic makes the questions better, the problem solving more complete, all of those things. So my responsibility is to do that, not to reward really great work from students. Because if that were my primary responsibility, we'd be admitting tens of thousands of students because the the applicant pool is filled with just tremendous individuals every year that are humbling in who they are and what they contribute to the world. So that's my job is to deliver to the university institutional goals and priorities within each of the four schools. There's the kid who is applying, who is the star of the show. I mean, that's a one and only role.
Mhm.
And really, things should all be organized around this particular student's interests, motivations, aspirations, to the extent that they understand them at that point and can articulate them. And parents, I appreciate all of you. I've done this myself. It is really hard not to pretend you are all of those other roles, right? And to use all of this superficial information that we were talking about earlier to challenge what you're hearing from a college admission counselor who's an expert, or from what an admission office is telling you matters for them in their application process, or to the testing conversation. The schools say, this is how we think about testing, and it gets overridden because a parent heard from fill in the blank something else, and somehow those sit at the same level of weight. Yeah, because school's telling you something for real about their own school, like that's the legitimate source, and yet it gets challenged by really superficial and sometimes overwritten by really superficial information. And when a parent is in all of that space, or trying to help a student create an application that reflects what the parent wants the student to reflect, then you're sort of getting into that role by mistake. You're getting into the applicant role. The parent's role is uniquely their own. There's nobody else that is in a parent role besides parent. And that that has an unbelievable opportunity to be a protective space for the applicant because it's home, it's family, it's somebody who already understands and knows how the student responds to stress, how they manage their time, how they, uh, you know, how they would naturally approach having to do something challenging with deadlines and articulating for themselves what they care about. And it is not the time to expect that your child's going to become a middle-aged person working through a college application process. They're going to meet these challenges the way they meet these challenges in other things. And working with what you know about that student to help them do this for themselves is going to help them feel confident in what they're going to take on, not only in the application process, but when they get admitted and have to enroll somewhere, that they did this, right? They did this and they had the support of all these other players. And the parents' role of support gets diminished when it starts to interfere in the other roles in a primary way.
Yeah, no, I think it's such a great reminder for parents out there, and understand that it's it's challenging to see your child go through the ups and downs. One other thing I wanted to get your take on, I think for so many students, rejection is just part of the process. I think one of the challenging things sometimes can be trying to be supportive, while not like minimizing disappointment, like with like, oh, you didn't want to go to that school anyway, where the student was like, yeah, maybe like it hurts to be rejected, and maybe it was a place I really like did have my heart set on. So how do you think parents can best be supportive in those situations?
This I thank you for asking this, and it's really hard to be the parent sitting with your child who has been really disappointed. And we want our children to be happy. We want what they want for themselves, right? We want them when they've put so much into something and we know how amazing they are. We want that to be recognized in in receiving good news. And I think what I see is particularly damaging, and so the opposite side is where you can be really helpful, is, I hear a lot from parents who are challenging our decision if it's not admission and pointing out to me the amazingness of their child and particular contributions and achievements, and you know I need an explanation, and I think you made a mistake, and you can imagine all the versions of this that come out. And what I worry about in those conversations is I'll often say, what other places are an opportunity for your child? Like, where else have they been admitted? And they'll list off some amazing places. Almost always at least one, right? If not multiples. And what they've done by engaging in this conversation with me is totally let the air out of the sails on the excitement of having gotten admitted to fill in the blank. Because that school or those schools that have offered admission are holding a place and hoping that student comes. That should feel great, right? Like that should feel so wonderful. And to not get admitted to a place doesn't feel good. And it's okay to have that feel really bad. But to double down on that shouldn't have happened. You belong in that place. I'm going to do something about it. Really just reinforces for the student harm has been done, right? And it's really hard to enjoy something to celebrate, which is they have options. And in the case where a student doesn't have an option, if they didn't get in anywhere, you want the positive energy to be, this is a tough process and you're still amazing. And so the next thing that we need to do, if you want to proceed, is figure out the next steps to move forward in education. Education is not going away. Like it's always available. And I think students feel like the momentum of you graduate and you go right on to college. Well, not everybody does. And in the long run, if you have a year off or 2 years off, it it's not going to hurt your chances of being admitted because of that. And it's not the worst thing that can happen. And when you treat it like it is, it makes it really difficult for students to be resilient in that. And again, being the parent who is like, I've got you. This really hurts. And let's put our energy into like the really good news part.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great reminder for folks, and definitely I've seen that. Just the students. I think it just doesn't, it makes them, why would you want, the your child to go, wherever they're going next year and just be like less excited or feel like they have a chip on their shoulder or it's like beneath them or something, when it's, you know, an amazing, wonderful opportunity. And I think that always made me really sad, and I think is a just a really great reminder for parents. And just going back to, earlier part of the conversation, there's literally thousands of wonderful schools that you could, attend and have a wonderful experience and, launch you into life through. So um this has been really great, Whitney. Really appreciate your time today. I think there's a lot of just great wisdom here for the, students and especially for the parents out there.
Yeah, thank you. And can I just
Yeah,
add one
yeah.
thing? I think when um I think when there's overemphasis on the perfect place, like it has to be this place because of whatever, it also makes it really difficult for a student to enroll. Let's say they get admitted and they go there, and everybody's happy about that. But when the conversation or the expectation is it's the perfect place, it makes it really hard for a student to have a real life experience that is not going to be perfect all the time. And as if that's not allowed, right? And then that adds a whole nother layer of pressure and anxiety during enrollment, where you really want the energy to be around resiliency, right? Like this is going to be a great place for you, and no place is a perfect fit. And so there are going to be things in your experience that are really challenging and not what you expected and harder than you want. And that like that's part of the whole package, rather than believing that if you just get into X, everything flows after that. And to remember that it's a real life experience, and parents can help sort of set the table for that in the way they talk about going to college, the way they talk about um, what to expect, and even the conversation around what's a good fit. I think there's no perfect fit.
Yeah, no, and just for parents, I think just like keeping that like a healthy, like really positive dynamic while your child's in college and just having like, you will always have your family and your parents to rely on and to be a resource and be a sounding board and an ear to talk to. Just because things will come up and it's not gonna be, yeah, I think that's such a great reminder for students who are, starting their freshman year out, and it's just the work is harder. Maybe they're away from home for the first time. They feel lonely. They feel like it's, just hard. It's a huge, the biggest like transition you've ever made in your life. So,
Right.
yeah, it's probably going to have some ups and downs and some really exciting things, and some days that just feel hard and lonely. But you've got this, and you have folks in your corner who are there for you.
Yeah. And admissions knows what they're doing, right? So when we bring students in, we know they're ready, even if they get there and they feel like, ah, I didn't know about this. You know, we
Yeah,
know
yeah.
they're ready. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Um, well, this has been really great, Whitney, and I know, Penn has some, other great resources that we'll be plugging, in the show notes. But yeah, I know it's a busy time of the year for admissions deans, so thank you so
yeah.
much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to talk through it.
Yeah, take care. Thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of Office Hours with Will Geiger. If you're a student or parent, don't forget to check out app.scholarships360.org, where you can sign up for our free scholarship matching platform. For colleges, we've got solutions to make your work easier, which you can check out at connect.scholarships360.org. And one last thing, if you or someone you know would make a great guest on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can always reach me by email or on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks again for listening.